Thank you so much, Ndogozo. After a long development journey since the advent of COVID-19, Hlakanyana brings folklore award-winning music and magic to Keorapetse Kgositsile Theatre at the UJ Arts Centre. Many of the South African issues that the country faces at the moment, such as gender-based violence, corruption, and the lack of moral guidance and uncertainty, are explored through the medium of folklore. Growing dissatisfaction of the status quo is also found in the fabric of the play's script. To tell us more about this is the cast member and head of writer Momo Matsunyane, co-producer Zolani Shangase. We also have the lead actor on video link, Sandisile Dlangalala, joining us as well. A very good morning to you guys. I see we've got Sandisile and Momo at the moment. Thank you so much for joining us on Weekend Report. It's such a pleasure. I'll start with you, Momo. This story is the retelling of a traditional Zulu folklore. What's the play about?
It's about this young man called Hlakanyana. In our adaptation, Hlakanyana is born very mysteriously. He's born almost man-child boyish. He's half grown and half a little boy, to the king and queen of this fictional space or village called Gwake. And upon seeing their child, the king banishes his son, Hlakanyana, to the wilderness to fend for himself, because he's like, that's not my child. I did not give birth to that. Gwake desperately needs an heir. And so as a result, Hlakanyana is banished. He's left to his own devices. And unfortunately, then along the way, he meets, different elements of nature, be it the willow tree or fire or the stars, or even the leopard. And along the way, with his interactions, he's a trickster also. I mean, it's also implied in his name, Uhlaka, meaning, cunning. So Hlakanyana is very tricky. And as a result of being alone so much in the wilderness, he ends up using these trickster qualities as a means of survival. But eventually, he finds his way back to the village of Gwake. And of course, at the center of all folklore storytelling is about lessons learned. And that's when the entire lesson is revealed to both, not just the audience, but Hlakanyana, the king, and the queen, as well as the people of Gwake.
And the lessons learned are a fusion, of course, of what's happening in the modern day as well within this traditional folklore. Let's go to you, Sandy Dlangalala. How much of this was easy to relate to because of, it speaks to some of the challenges that the country is facing at the moment?
Yeah, it's it was relatable in a certain way. I remember reading the brief for the audition for Hlakanyana, and I remember reading that he's this child who's born a man, and that was the first thing that that kind of gripped me about it. I related to that so much, as like, because I still have, I find in myself that I still have this very childish and very playful trait to my personality. And so upon reading the brief, I remember thinking I relate to Hlaks. So that's just on a personal level. I was just like, it sounds like so much fun, because I see myself as sometimes a man child, and but yeah, it also speaks to a lot of things in the country, in a way, because one thing that was interesting, in the opening, there were a lot of audience members that were kind of saying that, like, I am you, and like relating to also especially the queen. I think like the queen, in terms of being in a relationship where there's elements of toxic masculinity. The king shows he's really this kind of representation of toxic masculinity. His ego really stands in the way of him being an accepting father and a present father, and it's all about his legacy, not really anything to do about love. He just, he's thinking about his legacy and his heir to carry on his name, but he's not thinking of what being a father actually entails and what comes with that. So we saw in the audience that, people were relating to Hlakanyana, with, I'm sure, with like kind of like abandonment issues, or people maybe feeling having faulty relationships with parents or parental figures, and also relating to the Queen, I felt, in terms of being with a man who is toxic. And I hope I answered your question.
Indeed. Zolani, going by what Sandisile just said, all of these relatable nuances within this play is something that you as a co-producer would have to be very mindful about in terms of your treatment of the play. Talk to me about some of the processes that you had to go through and where your mind had to be in order for you to get it right.
Thank you for your question. I think it was very clear from the beginning of the story that we needed to collaborate with other actors and creatives in bringing the story to life. So we had to draw very much from our own experiences, be it personal or be it experiential, with us being artists. And the time that it was created was very much in COVID. So we had a sense of agency and an urgency in actually creating this piece, because we didn't have an outlet anymore as performers. So it was a process. We found so many incredible nuances that could be, inputted into the story, so that we could have many voices that came out of the story. And once the workshop process, which was the first part, was the script development, was done, we went on to the music development and then handed over to the lovely Momo Matsunyane to be head writer and end up fleshing out the story. So we went through a very, strict process of creating and workshopping and going back and forth and discussing. So we needed to make sure that the show was relatable, to the people watching, but not just to, Black South Africans, but to everybody that's watching the story, because it's very much a part of, our tradition to tell folkloric stories. So it was important for us to really dive deep into that nuance.
Absolutely. It really is a tradition, Zolani, to tell folklore. And Momo, I think that's the important bit here as well. As much as it's, a play, it's a musical, but ultimately folklore is really a part of the South African fabric. When you were approached to be the head writer, how did you take it on, and how do you feel about this particular project that you worked on?
Oh my goodness, I was so excited. I am a writer. I've written my own shows and performed in them and produced them. But I think this process, having followed from the online kind of workshopping that we did, and then seeing the story, reading about the original story about Hlakanyana, and when I was asked to then take on this task as head writer, I was like, oh my goodness, how do we make this relevant to us now in 2022, but also how do we change his fate? Because in the original, Hlakanyana dies, but by mistake, his mother pours, I think it's hot oil on his back, because it was a tortoise that he had stolen that was stuck on his back. And so he tried to get it off, and his mother pours hot oil, but the oil then kills Hlakanyana. And I was like, we wanted a far more positive ending, but also a story that would speak back to family units, to issues that we are facing nowadays as young people, like Sandy had mentioned earlier, the issues of abandonment, pressure from society when you are othered or subaltered or different, and where does the unmentored child go? Where does the child how do we throw away people? Like, and can you? And what's that concept like, right? And we know as Africans, even though it's been commercially used, the phrase of Ubuntu, is actually at the core of creating who we are as people, because it does take a village and no man walks alone. You're never an island in the African context. So for me, I think it was important that some of these issues were highlighted, and the pressure that women face over their having autonomy over their bodies. The queen is facing this pressure to have an heir, but like, hi, it's not happening. So what are we going to do? You know what I mean? Like, who are you going to blame? And why does that go onto the female? And it's another thing that within African culture that we don't speak about is when men cannot reproduce or have problems with fertility. And so we wanted to touch on those issues and to say, how do we bring forth these very important topics? But what the style of the folklore does is allow everybody to be included. So it does feel like from the beginning, the story, and she's describing this entire world. It's very simple in its setting, and deliberately so that we could also employ our imaginations in the same way that folktales need us to and require from us, because we're not just watching a show, but we're actually very active in the things that are happening on stage. So I think bringing a folklore in 2022 just shows the relevance of our own story ways, our modes of storytelling as Africans. And I think we shouldn't shy away from simple storytelling. I think we forget, sometimes we want to be wowed by pyrotechnics and fly bars and all of that. But at the end of the day, if there's no story, then what are we doing here? And that's where we really connect with the audience, through the African way of storytelling, the characters, the languages used in the story. And of course, with folktale, it's all about, did you learn something? Did you get something? Did the journey of the lead character, Hlakanyana, teach you something as the audience? And even the other characters, how the other characters are forced to grow as a result of their interactions with this character. It was a lovely task, challenging, but my goodness, I had such fun. I saw everything in my mind, and I was just like, oh my goodness, I am super excited to do this. And of course, what an honor for Matevu to choose me to be a part of this and to spearhead the writing of it. And I'm very proud to add this to my wonderful curriculum vitae.
Phenomenal stuff. We're going to leave it there. Thank you so much to the three of you for joining us on Weekend Report. It is Hlakanyana, the musical. It is currently ongoing. It started on the 25th of May. It will be running until the 8th of June at the UJ Arts Center. An absolutely fantastic tale that is. Thank you so much once again to the head writer, Momo Matsunyane, co-producer Zolani Shangase, and the lead actor, Sandisile Dlangalala.